Fredericksburg Planning Commission meeting to order. Would you please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
First order of business tonight is the review and approval of our September 12, 2018 meeting minutes. Has everyone reviewed those? Any comments or modifications? Jim?
Well, I would move to approve the minutes, but I'd like to make a comment. And that is, the minutes for the meeting didn't get distributed until today, and I only had a chance to look at them very briefly, but I wanted to commend our clerk because I thought they were very good and were inclusive of, seemed to represent very well the actions that were taken in the debate. And in particular, I liked the inclusion of the conflict of interest statement. I think that's a good practice for us to adhere to because regardless of what's said at the meeting, the form that's filed with that is important, and it becomes part of the public record, and that everybody, there's no question about what was done, and so I think it's good protection for everybody. So I move to approve the minutes.
Any comment?
I'll second it.
Any further comment? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Motion passes. Next item is declaration of conflict of interest. As you all know, I have a conflict of interest on public hearing items A and B. That's B1 and B2. I have filed my form with the clerk. My conflict of interest relates to the fact that the property in question that is being proposed to be used for this ball stadium is on land that is owned by one of my employers. So I will not be participating in the discussion. I will be turning the meeting over, seeing that we have the vice chairman is out today. I'm going to appoint Mr. Slominski to take over as chairman for the public hearings, item number 5. So any other declarations of conflict of interest? Okay, then Mr. Slominski, chair is yours.
Good luck, bud. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Because we had some of our commissioners missing last week, I think we'd like to have Mr. Craig go over Part A, the comprehensive plan amendment for the city of Fredericksburg, if you could.
Thank you, Mr. Smolinski. If I could have a computer, please. So a lot of the information will be a repeat for what you all saw at the last meeting. This item in particular is the comprehensive plan amendment that is proposed. It's initiated by the city. The comprehensive plan amendment is to establish a new sub-planning area called 1H and include public support for a public and private use stadium in that area. We did have a public hearing on this on September 12th, at which no one spoke, and it was kept open till this evening so that this item could be heard in conjunction with the stadium. A little bit of background on the proposal. The stadium would be privately built and owned, with the city supporting the development through a long-term financial commitment to the facility. The stadium's primary use would be as the home of a minor league baseball team. The city would also use the stadium for community activities, concerts, high school, college, and amateur athletics, major events, tours, meetings, and economic development prospects and other uses consistent with the sound operation of a professional minor league venue. Code of Virginia 15.2.2232 states that the comprehensive plan controls the general location, character, and extent of public features. The current comprehensive plan calls for a minor league baseball stadium in Celebrate Virginia South. That comes from the land use planning chapter, land use planning area 1, but it does not acknowledge the significant public support and use of the facility that's now proposed. Also, the proposed stadium use necessitate changes to the transportation network in and around Celebrate Virginia South. We'll go through what those changes are, but it is a change to the vision that's in the comprehensive plan. You can see kind of the four changes that we're going to talk about on the screen, and then we'll give the staff recommendation, which is to approve the comprehensive plan amendment. First off, the crux of the situation here, Chapter 4, Public Services, Public Facilities, and Preserved Open Space. Add a new heading, Public Use Stadium, to page 55. And this paragraph would just lay out what the public use of the stadium would be, and that it is a facility in 1H that we're going to participate in, and also include an initiative. So the end of the chapter has policies and initiatives, and we propose to add an initiative, support the development of a privately built and owned stadium through long-term financial support that secures public use of the facility. That would be the change to Chapter 4. Chapter 3, Transportation. There are 6 changes proposed here. The purpose of these changes is to reconfigure the proposed road network in Celebrate Virginia South so that a new interstate interchange feeds into a network of collector streets that also serve the stadium. Also, currently in the plan, and if you're looking at the screen, this is the existing transportation network map that's in the plan. And then on the right, this is the proposed map. We have this facility currently in our plan right here. It's the Rappahannock Parkway Toll Road. This has been removed from our regional plan. It's no longer part of our regional planning. And then, as part of this proposal, you can see here, with the proposed stadium use here, the proposal now would be to take the interstate, keep the interstate interchange, and have a network of collectors, 1, 14, and also 15. That serve to collect and distribute the traffic to and from Celebrate Virginia South, and no longer have it as a regional bypass for the city of, for surrounding localities. The third recommended change is the future land use map in Chapter 10, which shows the completion of the Celebrate Virginia Road network. So here again is the existing map on the left, and this is currently, the current road ends about right here at this intersection that's shown there. And all of this is unbuilt, but it is shown on the land use map. The realignment is proposed on the right. This is basically the route of the new proposed roadway. We've included the interstate interchange here as well. The realignment does have 2 advantages. It makes room for the stadium, number 1. And secondly, it creates a road network with enough distance from Interstate 95 that it may tie directly into future interchange ramps. So what we're saying there is a specific distance from the end of a ramp, wherever this comes off the interstate and the actual no access line, the federal highway line ends, say it's here, there has to be 1,320 feet until there's another intersection. So having this facility further to the west works well with that planning. We don't think we have enough room to have a full ramp that gets here without, and then being able to kind of tie right into the network. There would have to be some limited access and other things. So moving it to the west works well with our planning, I think, that's what I'm saying. The fourth change, Chapter 11, is to establish land use planning area H. In that area, there would be a public and private use stadium, supplemental ball fields for tournaments and training, and regional commercial uses, as well as a cohesive and interconnected network of collector roads that join Carl D. Silver Parkway, Gordon W. Shelton Boulevard, and the new interstate interchange. So the supplemental ball fields are currently in the land use plan for that area. They have to do with this property here, which has been planned for that type of use. We kept that in there. It would be a good supplementary use. Also, with the interchange and the stadium, the commercial viability of that area increases. So we kept that in that land use planning area 1H vision as well. Those are the proposed changes to the plan, and I'm happy to take any questions you guys have.
Any questions?
Yeah.
Ms. Bates?
Mr. Chairman, I wasn't able to attend the last meeting, but I have a number of questions. First of all, I was wondering if and when we take action on this tonight, I was wondering whether it's possible, there are 4 amendments to the comp plan, right? Is that right?
Grouped into 4 chapters. There's several amendments per chapter, yes, sir.
Right. What I was wondering about is whether we could take those individually instead of having a single vote because I think each one stands on its own, and there are different considerations for each one. So that was just a sort of a procedural question that I had.
Would that be a question for the attorney or something for myself to?
Well, you guys can organize your motions however you'd like. You can
Okay.
make a motion, if that's what you would like to do.
Any thoughts from the committee?
I'm fine with that because I have some questions about one of the proposed changes as well.
Right.
Okay.
Okay.
Let's go ahead and, I would recommend doing that then, yes.
Okay, great. The, on the first one, about the public services, an important part of this, it seems to me, is the letter of intent that was signed by the city for this stadium. I don't know whether anyone else has received that. I requested a copy of it today, and I haven't had a chance. I've looked at it very briefly, but I think that's an important part of this issue, and I don't know whether the planning department would like to go through that any at all.
Well, that was distributed in the last packet, if anybody had a chance to read it.
I see.
I'm not sure what your questions are about it. A lot of that has to do more with the kind of the city manager's office and economic development working to secure the facility. We were kind of focused more on comp plan and land use impact. So I don't know if you have a
Yeah, well,
you have a question about
the comp plan amendments contemplate a long-term financial commitment by the city.
Yes, sir.
If you could discuss that a little bit, what form does that take and how does it work?
Sure, yeah, it's an annual payment by the city to the stadium operators of $1.05 million
So it's $30 million by the city,
over 30 years.
right? And that is to be theoretically offset by revenue derived from the stadium facility, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, if and when the stadium is not successful, if that were to happen and it not generate the revenue that we're expecting, what happens to the city's commitment, financial commitment?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm going to try to answer your question now. Bill Freeling's not here. I know Kathleen and Rob are here. If I say something wrong or if I'm missing information, you all please jump in. If the team fails and the team goes away and they're no longer playing baseball, we no longer make any payments. If the revenue doesn't hit projections, then we need to try harder as a city to get the revenue up. A lot of the onus for the revenue comes from our holding events. We have 183 days that we have the right to use the stadium, and there's certain givens. There's a certain amount of tax revenue. There is a commitment by the silver company to give us X amount of dollars for, and I don't know the details very well, and I should. But the other set of revenue is to be made up through events, and that will be our responsibility.
Now, the big difference between this proposal and the one we had some time ago was that this is being privately built as opposed to the city.
Yes, sir.
But it still includes a $30 million commitment. My question is, if the city were to build it, it would be supported, I assume, by bonds, a bond issuance by the city, either revenue or general. But in this case, what is there to guarantee that payment? Anything? Or is it subject to annual appropriations? That was my question.
Okay, yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, and again, this is really an economic development question. It's a good question, I guess. And yeah, Ms. Dooley?
Yes, please.
In answer to your question, Kathleen Dooley, City Attorney, the payments are $1.05 million per year for 30 years. The net present value of that would be something less than $30 million. And they are subject to an annual appropriation by City Council.
Right. And so, as I used to term that it's really a moral obligation by the city to make that payment, correct? It's not a binding legal commitment. Or is it?
It is as stated in the LOI. We're working on the definitive agreement that will include the city's commitment to pay $1.05 million per year for 30 years, subject to annual appropriation by City Council. And so what we're asking, there will be a big public aspect to this new privately financed and constructed and owned and operated stadium. Because what the city got in return, one of the things that the city got in return for its financial commitment was the right to use the stadium for city events. So programming that we might put on through our Parks and Recreation Department, or that might be through our Economic Development Department, can take place in this new stadium. And that's why we felt it was important to amend the comp plan to reflect that there is going to be a public, a new public use out in Celebrate Virginia South.
So if there were, if it's subject to annual appropriations, would there be any penalty if the city withdrew?
You know, I'm not at liberty to go into discussions at this time. We are working on the definitive agreement, and the deal is as stated in the LOI, a $1.05 million funding commitment for 30 years by the city that's subject to annual appropriation. But you stated it very clearly. We are making that commitment to pay $1.05 million a year for 30 years.
So I saw something in there, and I'm not sure I totally understand it. There is a section in the LOI that talks about a termination, and if the agreement is terminated, that there would be some, I'm assuming that's a payment by the city somehow tied to the projected revenue. Can you explain that?
Yes, in what the LOI sets forth is a termination payment. In the event of non-appropriation of the annual payment,
Right.
the city would make a termination payment that would be calculated on the local tax receipts, as I recall, the local tax receipts generated by the facility. And it would be essentially a net present value calculation of what would the city's financial commitment have been moving forward based on the actual performance of the stadium.
So if the city were to terminate, it would still owe a hefty termination fee?
As provided in the LOI.
Yeah, I didn't quite understand all the ins and outs of it, but it looked to me, like I say, just looking at it very briefly, it looked to me like it would be a sizable penalty. Okay, thank you.
We are making a 30-year commitment to a facility that will have the right to use that facility for about half the year, for 30 years going forward.
Right. Okay. Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I have a question about Chapter 3 on the transportation. First of all, I had a question about your drawing here, that on page 5 of the memo, and you were showing it, Mike, both the existing road network and then the proposed interchange. But on this drawing, the interchange doesn't go anywhere. And yet, in another drawing I saw somewhere, it did tie in to the, what is that, Gordon Shelton Boulevard or whatever?
Yes, sir. Yeah, and that's on purpose. Very hesitant in a zoomed-in view like this to start drawing lines on a map where we're not certain. However, in the more general map, we generally are going to connect to the interstate here. So that's on purpose, not to draw lines here. We don't know the exact location of that interstate and don't want to start putting lines on people's property that aren't before you all tonight.
Well, there are not too many choices of where it could go.
Well, it could vary though, and before we went down that road, we'd want to be certain.
My other question is, how does that interchange tie into the visitor center exit?
And that needs to be decided. So this is part of the next presentation. One of the questions we got from the commission was, what is the city doing to pursue this interstate interchange? We are, within the year, working with FAMPO to get an interchange justification report completed. And that's the technical document you work through with FHWA to, one, justify the need for the interchange and then do the design work to pick a location. So that work needs to be done.
Because, I mean, I thought, aren't there general federal guidelines on how close these exits can be to each other? This seems like it'd be right next to it.
And that'll be all part of that technical process. And you kind of get a sense, talking through all the things going on there, why we feel like, okay, it's okay to move this further west. There's a lot that has to happen there. But that technical work needs to be done, Mr. Pates, and we are working on that, getting that report funded through FAMPO, and the work underway within the year.
So I guess in theory, at least, and I'm no engineer, but that the exit could serve both as a connection into Celebrate Virginia and the Visitor Center. You'd have one exit that would go to both.
It could. I don't have any, I have not seen any conceptual that would indicate that, but sure, it could. Well, the one thing that I have heard from our transportation planner is that it needs to be an exit and an entrance. We can't just do a loop off. So there's a lot to plan in that area. I think is
But the Visitor Center has an entrance back on.
Yes, sir.
The imminent reconstruction of 95, where there are going to be through lanes
yeah.
and then collector distributor lanes, changes the nature of the design of the design parameters for the interchange. So that's why it is difficult at this point in time to make a commitment to exactly where it's going to be located and how it's going to be designed, simply because the nature of the interchange is going to dramatically change, and that nature of the interstate is going to dramatically change.
And I'm assuming there's always a possibility that Federal Highways won't approve this.
Yes, sir, there is.
Then what happens?
Well, then we don't get an interchange. It's part of our vision now. Having it in our comprehensive plan is a key point for the IJR. But if it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen.
And the plans for the stadium would remain the same?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Page, I think it's generally felt that with the construction of collector distributor lanes, it makes it a little easier for us to get an interchange because there's less of an impact on through lane traffic, but that's all to be determined.
Okay. That's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Pates. And anybody else? Mr. Rodriguez?
Yes, I have a couple of questions, and I apologize that I was not also here at the meeting. Although from the minutes, I think some of this conversation did come up. So I'll go with I guess it's number 4, chapter 11, the portion on 123. It says that the proposed change would be a street connection should be made between Gordon Shelton Boulevard and Carl D. Silver Parkway.
Yes, sir.
And I thought, I don't know, I guess my understanding was that was going to be a requirement, not necessarily an 8-lane road or whatever, but that there would be some type of connection built with the project that would connect to Gordon Shelton. So is it fair to say at this juncture there is no plan currently to connect those?
Well, this is a
As part of the
plan, this is
construction.
a plan to connect. And let me
Okay.
have the map back. Let me show you something. We
Yeah.
went through this a little bit last week. If I could have the computer, please. I want to point this out, Mr. Rodriguez.
Yep.
So this isn't even really the best one to see it on. There is currently no right-of-way here through this property. So if we had a situation where there was a full set of right-of-way here, we would feel a little bit differently about that being a planned connection. But there isn't. There is no connection there. So what we've got here is a planning document. We want to establish the vision, and I think it's better shown here, that there will be a connection. It's not planned to happen with this stadium proposal. There's 2 properties that would need to be crossed. I'm going to pull up a different presentation, show you the actual land that I'm talking about here. So there's a parcel here. The right-of-way currently ends right here. There is no right-of-way here. And this is not a property that's owned by the applicants. It's not a property, it's owned by the Diamond Nation folks
Right.
under another name. So the proposal is to kind of reroute the road this way. This is a separate property owner and this is a separate property owner. We're putting this in the plan so that when those properties develop, we get the pieces of the road that we need. But there is no planned connection with the stadium.
All right, and so currently it's basically coming out the one entrance, or in and out of the stadium via the one entrance.
Yes, sir. Yep.
Okay. All right, and then sorry, I
Go
got
ahead.
one more question. Sorry, and this is really, I think, a question for the planning commission, really. So I don't know if it comes under discussion when we go to vote, but under, I guess, page 118, that proposal, that language says, shucks, let me find it, sorry. 118. All right, yes, okay. So it says that, encouraging shared parking between the stadium and other existing parking lots. So my question for our discussion here in the Planning Commission, do we agree with that concept? Because I don't know, I mean, I read some of the discussion before, but I have major concerns with building a place that's by code required, at least right now, 1,200 parking spaces, and them only building 500 spaces. And then I understand, you know, the proposed arrangement between the convention center, but my issue is if we're supposed to have the other events on there during the rest of the year, the 180 some odd days, and activities, I'm concerned still about traffic flow and being able to provide for those events properly, because there's still only one way in, even if it's 2 lanes in each direction. That's the only way to get in and out of there. And if there are competing events, I understand that the baseball games may start at a different time, but that doesn't preclude the convention center from planning, some type of big expo or a weekend event that would, in essence, conflict with that. Or vice versa. What if the city planned an event on one of our 180 some odd days and the convention center has the Comic-Con come to visit? There's congestion there and a large opportunity for some havoc. And then I'm also just concerned in terms of safety. If there were, a catastrophic event at the stadium, how would everybody be able to get out of there safely, without having adequate exits, I think. And then, also the amount of the small amount of parking spaces.
Mm-hmm.
So those are kind of questions that I have for the commission is, do we really share that idea? I know planning staff always wants less asphalt, but in something like this and also potential future development, let's not ignore, yes, this is 37 acres, but there's a whole bunch of other land right next to it that could be developed for future use, non-residential. So we're going to have people that are going to be coming in and out of that area. So I'm really concerned with those two issues, but I want to get a sense of what we as a planning commission are about, because I know we've downtown, at least in several areas, we've created our own parking problem. And I don't want us to go down a path where we have basically an open slate to make something beautiful. And I think what the owners of the stadium have proposed is great, but I don't want us to be short-sighted on potential future. And, so I just wanted to have that conversation.
Any thoughts from the commissioners?
Well, we kind of talked about that 2 weeks ago because we asked the applicant.
Right.
I mean, we're pretty confident that they're going to work with the Expo people. They're going to get their baseball schedule 9 months, maybe 12 months in advance. So they're going to try to make sure that there aren't any conflicts. I mean, baseball games will be at night except for Sunday, where they'll be in the afternoon. So I'm pretty reasonably confident they're going to make sure that they're not going to, everybody's not going to be there at the same time, like the Marine Corps half marathon and a baseball game and the convention center. I mean, and if you look in Washington, they got the brand new MLS stadium up there, right next to the baseball stadium. Mm-hmm. They're not going to conflict. They get together with their schedules to make sure that they don't come, both things aren't going at the same time. And I'm sure they'll do the same thing with baseball.
Any other comments?
Yeah, I was just going to say that if that is a concern, couldn't that be addressed through the special use permit?
It can. I've actually got the numbers on the parking if you guys want to see that. That was a question that came up last
Yep.
time. If, Renee, if you want to see that. You guys are blowing through all my slides here. This is follow-up items for the special use permit. Number one, how would the shared parking with the Expo Center work? There's 830 parking spaces out there currently. By ordinance, the Expo Center requires 300, so there's 530 excess parking spaces there. Also through the ordinance, they could do an alternative parking plan. They could use those 530 excess spaces through that plan and then share the other 300. Now, provided that they're all within a certain distance. They have to be within, I think it's 1,500 feet of the entrance of the stadium. So they could do that. They would still then have to build 425 spaces or whatever it is, because they're going to have to meet their minimum requirement. Our ordinance just permits you to do it in multiple ways. And we talked about some of the benefits of shared parking last time, and also the applicant talked about their plan to kind of coordinate with the Expo Center. So I just want to show you the numbers, man.
Okay. Anyone else?
My only point on
Yes.
that was that that discussion might be better held when we're discussing the special use permit rather than the comp plan amendment. Well, I had one other question or comment. On your sheet showing the existing and proposed roads, your improvement number 15 is that an extension of the Gordon Shelton? Or I can't remember the names of those streets.
Yes.
Is it Gordon Shelton? Okay.
Yeah, and the idea.
I
there
remember
was-
Gordon, but I don't remember the street name.
Well, it's Gordon W. But we want to, it's not in plan currently, and that is a parcel that is zoned R2, that its future is not R2 zoning. This is going to have traffic impacts, and we do need to look at this regionally. And this is an improvement that we want to show in plan now, because that is a piece of infrastructure that needs to be part of the future planning of, a major tourist generator. Having that additional connection between Fall Hill Avenue and Cowan Boulevard. So that's why that is included right now.
I think that's very good, regardless of what goes out there in Celebrate Virginia. I think that's a very good thing to have here on the plan. So that's good. I like that. Thank you.
Mr. Rodriguez, conversation to your satisfaction, or?
Sure. I just, I just want us as a planning commission to coalesce around an idea or a concept that we can all support, I think, with
Okay.
regard to parking.
Thank you. I believe everyone's given their 2 cents. My 2 cents on that is, yes, I always have a concern of building more parking than needed. And I do believe that everybody involved here has a vested interest to make the experience, the Expo Center experience and the stadium experience great. Because if there is traffic jams and people having trouble getting out, that hurts their bottom line. So I can't fathom that they're not going to be working together. At this time, Mr. Craig, if you've got some further information from follow-ups from our talk last time, I saw your little slides there. I feel it's appropriate at this time to show those and then probably open it to public, the public hearing part.
Yes, sir. There was really the 2 items. How would the shared parking work? So I wanted to put the numbers out there so you guys could see the numbers. And then the second question was about actively pursuing the interchange.
Okay.
So we're working on the IJR. And Eric, talked to Eric Nelson, our transportation planner today. They're working to do that within a year. So.
Okay, thank you. Unless any commissioners have objections, I feel at this time, let's open it to the public hearing portion of the comprehensive plan amendment. So anybody at this time has a thought that they want to share, please come up to the podium, say your name and address, please.
Good evening. I'm Seth Silber on behalf of the Silber family, the owner of the baseball team. We're pleased to be here. Appreciate you considering the matter. Just want to let you know that we're here to answer questions or provide input if you need it. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else?
I'm Ed Whalen, 7007 Princess Anne Street. I'd just like to speak to Mr. Rodriguez's comments on the parking. I think that's an excellent question. I think that is a concern. But when you look at the expo, the extra spaces that they have there, and seeing us share uses like that with parking, I'm in support of having less pavement if we can in our projects. I'd like to see that, and I'm sure that if the owners are that successful where they need the other 425 spaces, I hope they are that successful, and you can phase that where they can provide that in the future. So I think that's a great question, and I'd like to see the project move forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. At this time, is it appropriate to ask for motions or comments from the commissioner on the public hearing part?
Yes, sir. You can close the public hearing, I think. And
Okay, let's officially close the public hearing unless there's somebody, okay. Any thoughts, commissioners? Mr. Bates?
Mr. Chairman, do you think it would be appropriate to have the public hearing on item B on the stadium before we take any action?
Any thoughts from the commissioners?
Probably won't make much difference. I don't think there are There's a lot of comment.
That's
I,
fine.
I think this is pretty high level. That, I mean, even if we vote on this part, I don't know that it, I don't know.
And again, repeat it, Mr. Pates, what you're requesting
I was just asking
to
if
go.
we could have the second public hearing on the special use permit before we take any votes. That's all.
Okay. Unless there's any thoughts, I share Mr. Pates's opinion, and if that's okay. Mr. Craig, if you could walk us through, for those who weren't here last time, number one, CPCR 2018-01 for the city of Fredericksburg to request the vacation of a portion of Carl D. Silver Parkway right-of-way between Haymarket Street and the northern property line of GPIN 7860-60-7626, which requires a planning commission compliance review by the planning commission to determine if the approximate location, character, and extent of the vacation is substantially in accord with the 2015 comprehensive plan.
Yes, sir, and we want to tie the two items together. Mr. Slominski, if you want to read the second item as
Okay.
well, the special use permit.
The second part of that would be SUP 2018-03. Potomac Baseball LLC requests a special use permit in order to build a stadium and Celebrate Virginia South in the Planned Development Commercial Zoning District, PD-C.
Thanks, sir. As Mr. Slominski said, there are two items before you all today. The special use permit for the stadium, and the second is a comprehensive plan compliance review for the request to vacate and realign the existing Carl D. Silver right-of-way running through the property. These items were originally heard on September 12th, but held the public hearing open. The applicant had submitted a revised application on September 4th, and I'll just show you guys. You see these pieces of orange here, right here and here. This was removed from the application, and then this was included in the application. The difference of about 2.16 acres in order to kind of react to the technical review committee's comments, but that did require re-advertisement, so that's why we're here tonight. I'll leave it on this slide. The stadium is proposed on 37.71 acres in Celebrate Virginia South. Celebrate Virginia South was designed as a regional national tourist destination. We've got 6-lane roads feeding the site. The sites are very large. They're mass graded. There's heavy infrastructure designed for intense land uses. Previous uses proposed were water parks, slavery museums, national traffic generating uses. The property, I'm going to go back a slide. The property is what you see outlined in cyan, and then the right-of-way that's proposed to be vacated is here in orange. The right-of-way is vacant. There is no roadway there currently. Actually, there's no roadway here either, which is not proposed to be vacated. The property itself contains a construction stockpile from when they built Celebrate Virginia South, when they built the roads and when they built sites. It's got a topsoil screening operation on it. Over here to the right, this is the ancillary parking for the Expo Center. There are conservation areas here, and there is a stream conservation area here. These are protected under the master site's environmental permitting. They cannot be disturbed. The proposed, okay, we talked about the right-of-way. And then I think I pointed this out last time, but I want to make sure and show you all the gap in the right-of-way right there. And also note that there are environmental features through this area here. I think that's important to the discussion of the right-of-way vacation. Here's the slide with the proposed stadium on it. The proposed stadium will seat approximately 5,000 people. It'll contain approximately 87,200 square feet of building area, covered party decks, and covered concourses. The applicant has submitted a general development plan with the project, and I'll go through the elements that it shows right here for you guys. This is the general location of the stadium. This green is the right-of-way proposed to be realigned and dedicated. It contains the details of a roadway section to be built here. It's 4 lanes. It has a bike trail. It has a sidewalk. It contains a sign location here along I-95. It contains a general overflow parking area covered here. And then there's a note here that says cutting of the trees and grading will be limited in this area for visibility to the sign. So that's basically a tree save area. Like the Hilton rezoning, this project proposes an intermediate master plan to be approved administratively prior to any subdivision or site plan being approved. If you remember the Hilton rezoning, we wanted to load in another additional level of site planning before any permits were approved on the site. It would contain an infrastructure component and a land use component. The infrastructure component would include a traffic analysis, a utility availability analysis, including capacity analysis of the existing sanitary pump station, as well as conceptual utility layouts to serve the site and a general stormwater treatment concept plan. We're comfortable doing this at an administrative level with the master plan because this site was designed to be a regional national tourist destination. There are 6-lane roads here. We don't anticipate that we're going to study it. We don't anticipate that new roads are going to be required to serve this site. Signal timing, certainly, that may be something that comes out of it. An additional turn lane, that may be something that comes out of the plan. And the applicant will be obligated to build that into their site planning and build those facilities with the site plan. But the layout itself, the infrastructure serving this property itself is very strong. It was designed for this stuff. The land use component, so that's the one kind of infrastructure component. The land use component would include a conceptual plan showing the approximate location of lots, buildings, structures, access, and landscaping, as well as that parking and analysis and strategy. So that would all come with the master plan. We looked at potential impacts and proposed mitigation, identified 2, lights and noise. The stadium lights will be 125 foot tall. That is permitted by the ordinance. Stadium lighting is permitted to be that tall. The field lighting is required to be intense. I think this is a minor league baseball requirement. They need the field to be lit at 70 to 100 foot candles. That's their spec. Our ordinance limits you to 3. So they've listed on there that they will need an exception for that. That's certainly understandable. And that would be an administrative site plan exception, like a design waiver. And that would be acceptable in this case. The stadium is proposed next to an apartment complex. So right here is the Silver Collection Apartments under construction now. And what they've provided in their application, if you saw it, is some diagrams showing how modern lighting in these stadiums work. They're required to meet a certain level at the property line, a certain light level, and they're going to meet it. So that's good planning on their part. In terms of noise, most of the public comment that we got was about noise. It was from people that live in Celebrate, Virginia North here, and this is it across the river. When we sent all that information to the applicant, they provided some information response. They proposed several noise attenuation features. The stadium will be oriented so that the open portion will face Interstate 95, and this is the diagram that you see here. This red line is the orientation. Home plate being here, this being center field, and the stadium being pointed out towards I-95 away from our residential areas here, the adjacent residential area here, and Celebrate Virginia North. The field will be sunk 15 foot below grade, and the audio system will be designed with decibel limits. And all of these items have been added to the GDP as conditions. So that was a good measure on their part. Comprehensive plan and UDO compliance. The comprehensive plan designates this area as planned development commercial. That land use designation envisions uses oriented to serve the regional market, which this certainly would. The application does meet the additional UDO criteria for stadiums that are listed on the screen. It would be in some conformance to the existing comprehensive plan, but we are proposing a comprehensive plan amendment to bring it fully into conformance with the comprehensive plan, and that's what we just talked about. We talked about the 2 follow-up items, so I won't spend a whole lot of time going through here. There's the numbers on the parking again, and we are pursuing an IJR to activate that interstate interchange. And our recommendation starts with you do need to at least take 2 separate actions here. So the first is related to the vacation of the right-of-way. It is you all are required to do a comprehensive plan compliance review determination. That vacation and realignment of the right-of-way is in conformance with the comprehensive plan. We recommend that you find that it is, and also recommend conditions or elements that should go into the deed, whatever mechanism they go in. These 3 things were listed in your staff report. That the owner and developer of the land provide sufficient construction easements to adjacent property owners when they build the road, make sure that they can build it. That additional right-of-way is provided where turn lanes are required, so we have an 80-foot section of right-of-way that's currently proposed. If a turn lane comes in and that needs to be 90 or 100 feet, that the applicant would then dedicate that extra width. That any deeded access to landlocked parcels be provided with access. There are some landlocked parcels there that are under common ownership but don't have a deeded access currently. When this road is realigned, deeded access will need to be given. And that if the stadium project is not constructed, then the 4-lane road section is still required to be built by the developers of the adjacent property. So we don't want to lose our ability to require the full 4-lane section of the road after we've vacated the right-of-way if the stadium project does not happen. So those are the 4 conditions or deed elements that we propose there, whatever mechanism they use, we use to go forward. We did have one listed in your staff report, this letter D. If the stadium project is constructed, then the owner of the adjacent land needs to finish the road. We've moved that to the SUP. That's better under the SUP after talking with Rob Ekstrom, our assistant city attorney today. I want to flip that over. That would now be a condition under our recommendation for this is the special use permit now. So this is a second approval, second motion that needs to be made. We recommend approval with these 4 conditions. And I'll go through those real quick. That the use and development of the stadium conform to the side agreement. If you guys remember our discussions about Valvoline and 7-Eleven, the side agreement is not a zoning document. It's a different agreement that was made outside of proffers. It's best practice for us to make it a zoning document so that everything is very clearly enforceable. So we've included that as a condition here. The use and development of the stadium shall conform to the GDP. That's standard. And we want to capture the noise attenuation, the right-of-way location, the typical section, so that's included there. That the stadium developer construct the typical section that they've shown to their primary entrance at a minimum and to the northernmost entrance of any required parking. If there's an overflow lot outside of their required parking that's for some seasonal event or something like that, there may be an alternative there that works, but if it's required parking under the ordinance that has to meet our full standard, then we need the 4-lane section to go to its northernmost entrance. And then that final condition, the road would be completed to the property line as any adjacent property is redeveloped. That's our recommendation. There's a lot right there at the end, so I'm happy to go through those in more detail with you guys or take any other questions you've got.
Commissioners, any questions?
Oh, sure, I've got plenty of questions. First of all, in the memo that we got tonight, there were 3 conditions listed, recommended conditions.
Yes, sir.
Now, tonight, could you put that slide back up? Now there are 4?
Yeah, let me show you that. This is a key point, Mr. Bates. This is the vacation of the right-of-way, okay? We had 1, 2, 3 with an A, B, C, and D under 2, and that's on page 1 of your memo. You can see 1 and 2.
Right.
And number 2's got A, B, C, and D.
Right.
Letter D is a condition for the special use permit, and that was something the attorneys and I were talking about very recently that really needs to go with the special use permit approval. So there was this is the special use permit on your screen now, and now we're on at the bottom of page 2 and the top of page 3. We had 3 conditions there. You're absolutely right. They have not changed. We took D from the last page and moved it over here as number 4, and that's the difference. Thank you for bringing that up.
This is very interesting. I've never seen anything like your condition number 1 in a special use permit. Both 1 and 2 look very much like proffers. And of course, we don't have proffers here because it's not a rezoning. But it's kind of interesting, I think, that those type of conditions have been added to this special use permit. And I think particularly the first one is very good. I think it's good to tie that side agreement into this special use permit because there's a lot in that agreement, and it's important. And so I think that's very good. One of the things, though, that I question, going back to our discussion about the interchange, it seems to me that it's extremely important for this project to have the interchange. And I think that it's less appealing and less attractive for the city if that interchange never happens. And I'm assuming that you don't think that would be appropriate as any kind of condition, because the stadium could get built next year and it'd be 10 years before an interchange happens.
That's one point, yes, sir. And then secondly, the interchange, having the interchange feed into Celebrate Virginia South is a huge positive. Is it absolutely necessary for the stadium to function? No, it's not. This facility, the whole development was designed for this type of use. So I don't want to conflate those two. We don't feel from a technical standpoint that it's necessary. Man,
Yeah,
does
but
it
some of
make it
these
better.
other things aren't necessary either, like your side agreement, that's not necessary for it.
Well, the vision that was established for that whole development was as a tourist campus, and that was where those provisions were put. So we think that adds to the function.
But the comprehensive plan, both the existing one and the proposed changes, do contemplate an interchange.
Yes.
And I think that's a very important thing. Now, I don't know how you would tie this to a special use permit,
Well,
because
what you said right up front was absolutely right. I mean, they can,
it may never,
we
you don't know.
we can't tie them to the whims of the federal government, you know.
I work in the building with the federal highways, but I wouldn't count on them doing anything.
Well put.
Anyway, so I'm not sure that there's anything that can be done on that score. I also had some questions about the sign. How tall is the current Central Park sign?
175 feet.
Oh my God, we're going to have another one that size?
It is permitted to be 175 feet.
I can't support that. Okay. Also, it's interesting to me that we're talking about, in our ordinance, says that performance standards in section 72-41.3 says stadium shall be located at least 1,000 feet from single-family residential zoning districts.
Yes, sir.
Why should this be any different for apartments across the street?
Well, that's a good question. Living somewhere is living somewhere. But the ordinance differentiates between single-family homes and mixed-use districts, and this is a mixed-use district.
No, I realize that. But when we're considering a special use permit, it seems to me that the conditions that we have seen as favorable to protect residential dwelling units, whether it's single-family, townhouses, apartments, seems to me to be the same here.
Mr. Bates, the ordinance is full of differentiations between the standards that are applied to single-family development and multifamily development. I think I understand the general thrust of where you're going there, but it is not unusual and it is not uncommon that there are just different standards, that multifamily is considered more intense in its nature and in its circumstances. So I don't believe that there is a hard and fast rule that they have to be treated the same, and in fact, the ordinance treats them differently in many places, in terms of buffers, distances between types of uses, height standards, relationship of transitional activities. It's not a black and white situation.
I realize that, but you think maybe we ought to take away the 1,000-foot for single-family homes? Maybe we should do that, too. I don't have any other questions.
Thank you, Mr. Bates. Anyone else?
I have, I guess, one question, and maybe for the applicant. Sorry, the mic's not on. Here we go. And I'm just curious, in order to answer, I guess, the second part of that question for whether or not to approve the special use permit for a stadium, I'm just curious, I guess, big picture, what type of anti-terrorism force protection measures are being taken for your stadium, the proposed stadium? That's an issue that I'm concerned with, and seeing in recent times actors and things like that. I'm just wondering what kind of precautions are being done.
I'm wondering at this time if the applicant, during the public hearing portion.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah, we'll
Sure, sorry.
want to answer that. Anyone else? Okay. At this point, if it's appropriate, we'll open the public hearing for B, proposed stadium and Celebrate Virginia South. Anyone step up, please say your name and address.
Seth Silver again on behalf of the applicant. Ms. Rodriguez, your concern is obviously our concern as well. You know, providing a safe environment for our fans and their families is paramount to what we do. We take that very seriously. We take it very seriously in our current ballpark. We have a very close cooperative relationship with the Prince William Police Force. They support us very strongly in those efforts. Minor League Baseball is very concerned about this as well. They're studying the issue. They're looking at standards that we should implement. I don't think that we're necessarily going to have metal detectors as they would have at Nationals Park, and I would hope it wouldn't be necessary, you know, in this community. But we take it very seriously, and we obviously are going to work very closely with the local police here to ensure that all safety requirements, and in our discussions with the city, the agreement does incorporate that we will consult with the local law enforcement to ensure that we provide adequate safety.
All right, thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, without seeing anybody else, we will close the public hearing portion. And any further discussion amongst the commissioners? Okay, seeing no more discussion, I believe at this point it would be appropriate to take motions based on Mr. Pates's recommendation. We could take motions on A first, broken into 4 different parts. Any motions at this time?
I'd like to make a motion to do that. I'm not exactly sure how to do that. I second that motion.
Would any help for the attorney would be appropriate, or Mr. Johnston?
Mr. O'Toole, the comprehensive plan staff report does break this down into 4 elements.
Right.
At the bottom of the first page, the first amendment is Chapter 4, Public Services, Public Facilities, and you can make a motion addressing that phrase, that title there, recommending an amendment of the comprehensive plan, Chapter 4, Public Services, Public Facilities, Preserved Open Space, as described.
Okay.
That would be one way to do it, and go through the other second, third, and fourth titles.
Do you make these independent? So it'd be
I
4
think
motions?
for our sanity, we probably should.
Okay. Well, I'd like to make the motion, then we recommend approval of the comprehensive plan amendment as stated under the, which involves Chapter 4, the public services, public facilities, and preserved open space.
Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
Okay. Guess I have to go back to my chair and vote.
You can just
Okay.
vote there.
We're up there. Okay. At this time, then, commissioners, please vote on the on chapter.
Mr. Chairman, if I may speak to the motion.
Okay.
I asked about this, splitting this up, because I think there are different considerations for different parts of these comp plan amendments. And on the first one, while I support baseball, I think it's wonderful to have a stadium, but I have real problems, and it's stated here in the language for this amendment that it would support an initiative. It says, under our initiatives for public facilities on page 59, the new language would say that we support the development of a privately built and owned stadium through long-term financial support that secures public use of the facility. And that goes to the letter of intent. And I have real problems with the city committing itself for 30 years for $30 million for a private project. This constitutes a very, very strong incentive. I'm not opposed to incentives in the right place and at the right time. I thought the incentives that the city used to keep Mary Washington Hospital here and to expand was great, because it affected all the citizens, provided real employment opportunities, good employment opportunities for the city. And so I think that was one situation where it was very good. But I just don't think that we have the wherewithal. We have no way of really knowing what economic conditions are going to be like, or the success of a stadium long-term. And I think it's just too much for the city to commit to. I also think, well, that's my main objection to this the first motion for Chapter 4.
Okay.
So,
Any other comments from commissioners before we take a vote?
I'd be curious, Mr. Pates, have you read the economic analysis that was given to us at the last meeting? I know it's not in this package, but it was in the previous one. Have you had a chance to review that?
I've read lots of them, yes, I have read it,
That particular one?
yes.
Do you feel there's some glaring error in the way they've calculated some of the revenue for the
Like-
$1 million payback?
Like most of those kinds of studies for developers, it's all rosy. And I think that they've been proven wrong many times. I just am very skeptical about all the rosy projections for any project.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. At this time, if we could take a vote?
We're not coming up.
Hold on a sec.
Yes, sir. Yeah.
Yeah, flip the switch.
Push the reset button.
All these chairman duties.
Should we try it again? Okay, try it again.
Oh, there we go.
Okay.
Oh, no, wait a minute.
Yeah, I'm Chris.
You're Chris, okay, just wanted to make sure that was clear.
Okay. At this time, any commissioners' comments on the second proposal on Chapter 3? Any comments or motions?
I'll make a motion to approve Chapter 3 Transportation section.
Second,
Okay. If there's no other comments, let's vote at this time. Okay. And then the third item, Chapter 10, the land use plan. Any comments or motions?
I was under the impression that what Mr. O'Toole did was recommend approval of all four. That's not the case. They have to do one by one by one.
I believe we were talking about doing all four, and if Mr. O'Toole,
We're doing them one by one.
yes.
Okay,
Okay, thank you.
that was my understanding.
Okay.
I'll make a motion to approve the land use section, Chapter 10.
Any seconds?
I'll second it.
Okay. At this time, please place your vote.
Mr. Chairman, if I may comment,
Yes.
my vote will be no for the same reasons for Chapter 4.
Okay. If there are no other comments, let vote at this time. We're missing one. Okay. Thank you. And finally, number 4 on Chapter 11. Any comments or motions?
I'll just make the comment that I still think that we should have plenty of parking. I don't want to create an issue, and I'm very excited about this project, and I think it'll bring a lot of growth, but I think we're going to find ourselves with a lot of traffic issues in the future.
Okay, thank you for your comment. Any others? Any motions at this time?
I'll make a motion for approval. I'll second it.
Okay. Okay, please place your vote. Okay. Thank you. Now moving on to the section B, number 1. Any comments or motions at this time?
This is on the special use permit?
Yes, sir.
The
Yes,
first
Mr. Craig.
item,
No, it's the
listed
vacation of the-
Is the vacation, yes, sir. So the first
the
item will be the
vacation.
comprehensive plan.
Oh, okay. Would you like me to reread it? Or, yes?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Next item would be CPCR 2018-01, City of Fredericksburg's request, the vacation of a portion of the Carl D. Silver Parkway right-of-way between Haymarket Street and the northern property line of GPIN 7860-60-7626, which requires a comprehensive plan compliance review by the Planning Commission to determine if the approximate location, character, and extent of the vacation is substantially in accord with the 2015 comprehensive plan. Any comments at this time? Yes, Mr. Bates?
Am I right in understanding that there are two votes here?
That is,
Yes, sir, yeah.
So
The first is the comprehensive plan compliance for just the right-of-way, that
Okay.
2.31 acres. Second is the special use permit. Yes, sir.
Thank you.
and again, we were talking about the vacation of the right-of-way first. Any comments before we accept
Other
motions?
way around, shouldn't it? Shouldn't it be the conformance vote first?
They have it numbered number 1 and number 2.
I see. Okay, cool.
I make motion to approve CPCR 2018-01.
Okay,
Second?
second. If there are no other comments, let's vote at this time. Okay, motion passes. And now number 2, SUP 2018-03, Potomac Baseball LLC requests a special use permit in order to build a stadium and celebrate Virginia South in the Planned Development Commercial Zoning District, PD-C. Any comments or motions at this time?
This was on the vacation of the right-of-way.
No, the previous vote was on compliance with the comprehensive plan in terms of the vacation. That was the previous vote. This vote is on the special use permit.
I thought there were going to be two votes on the right-of-way. One, conformance, and then the actual vacation?
You do not, the planning commission does not vote on the actual vacation. You only determine whether it's consistent with.
We don't make a recommendation on that either?
No, that's a decision.
Okay.
We could if we wanted to.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I would like to ask Mike, if I could, before we vote on this next item, could you run over the parking one more time for me?
Yes, sir. If I could have the computer again, please. I'll start with this screen here. So the proposed stadium, Mr. O'Toole is here. Here is the expo parking here.
And how far is that roughly from the entrance? You said the entrance to the stadium is the 1,500 foot?
To use shared parking, hold on, let me get this right.
It's far.
To use shared parking and off-site parking, there is a prescribed distance, and it has to be an improved pedestrian way. You can't just have a slope, with a retaining wall or something. And I'll tell you the distances.
I mean, primarily, they're going to walk from the expo center over to the stadium. That's really that's the only parking places that we're talking about for this?
Yeah, well, that would be what was within their arc, within their, let me see. Shared parking is within 1,000 feet, and off-site parking is within 1,500. And so, let me show you the numbers again. There are currently 830 parking spaces in that area. Only 300 are required by the Expo Center, so there's an excess of 530. That 530 can be within 1,500 feet of the entrance to the stadium. If they wanted to share the other 300, they would have to be within 1,000 feet. So they'll have to figure out, how close that is. And they have the potential to be able to share however many are within those distances. Then they would, assuming they could share everything, they would still have to build 425 spaces. If they can't share everything, they have to build more to accommodate what they can't share.
So there's going to be the possibility of 425 spaces plus 830? That would be
Yes.
the total amount based on what these numbers show?
That would be 1,250 spaces, yes, sir.
1,250 spaces. And they're anticipating having 5,000 people,
Yes, sir.
maximum type?
Max, yep. One car per 4 seats, one park per 4 seats. That's the general, that's the ordinance rule.
Would that be pretty much in keeping with our concert type of situations too? They would be 4 to a car, that's not unusual?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, that's what I'd like to know. Appreciate it.
Can I ask a question? Because I think part of the question you answered. So how far is it from, physically, how far is it from, I guess, the first parking spot in the convention centers to the front door of the stadium?
We do not know those exact dimensions at this point in time. That's what's to be shown on the master plan, and this is the performance standard that they'll have to adhere to. So
Ballpark it?
it's generally within, it appears to be generally within that distance, but until we have it, we have to make that as a precise and exact measurement, and until we have the master plans that show those precise parameters, we can't know that. But it's still a parameter they have to meet. It's a rule they have to meet regardless.
Right. Is there a standard for the number of handicap spots that they'll need to have as well?
Right, there are percentage requirements for all
And
that.
what is that?
It's in the building code. I don't know what it is.
One for every,
I don't know what it is for a stadium. It varies depending on the type of use, but it's something that's very specific established in the building code, as well as their location and proximity to the entrance.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Bates?
you want the applicant to address how they park handicap stuff and what their parking proposal is?
Mr. Rodriguez?
I'm okay unless.
Well, maybe you can answer these questions. On the parking, you say that the current plan is to build about 400 spaces, right?
Well, like Chuck said, we have a master plan that they're gonna be required to give us a parking strategy. So we're just kind of laying out, shared parking is intriguing, and we wanted to make sure we put all options on the table, so you guys kind of knew, the maximum, the most conservative estimate out there, and that's what we've done. So we don't, the current plan is to build and share some amount of spaces.
Okay.
Well, maybe we should have them, just for the record, I guess.
Okay.
Might
That's
give
all
you
right.
more information, but I don't want to cut Mr. Bates off.
Yeah, don't do that. When it comes time to do a parking plan for it, on your shared parking, is that only through a formal lease or reciprocal parking agreement?
Yes.
Okay. And if that should expire, then what?
Then they can't operate until they replace the parking. Yeah,
Okay.
that is a hard and fast zoning rule, and we've had to use that tool that way in the past.
Right. And so, if they have those agreements in place, and only build 400 and some spaces, and something should happen along the way that they need to add additional spaces, how do we know that there will be sufficient room on that site for that additional 800 spaces?
I mean, that's a good question. It's a risk you'd assume,
But if there is a change of use, then
No.
we're starting all over again in terms of how the property is used or how it's laid out or designed. They still have to meet.
No, let's assuming it stays a stadium, but
Yeah.
they find that they need to build some of these additional 800 spaces. How do we know that there will be room on the site to do that?
That's their risk. I mean,
Yeah.
they've laid this out. They've identified the land which they think is going to work, and if these parameters, if they can't get these spaces within the area that's designated for the special use permit, then they've got to add more acreage, then they come back through the process again.
That's one way, or they build vertically.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Do we want to have the applicant, or you're happy?
I would be curious about, in terms of handicap access.
Okay, would the
If that's all right,
applicant
sir.
please step forward?
Yeah, just, generally about parking, and I think this is consistent with a lot of the discussion right now. Our objective is to have as fan-friendly environment as possible. And parking is a key aspect to that, having good access in and out of the ballpark. Our objective is to use shared parking as much as possible. somewhat from a cost perspective, but from an environmentally friendly perspective, we see the use of the expo facility as somewhat fortuitous to allow us to do this in a very smart way. We also do have significant flexibility as far as when we schedule our games. If I'm remembering, Mr. Beavers, I think you had mentioned from the discussion we had 2 weeks ago that we do have flexibility as far as the scheduling of our games. Nearly all of our games are at night. The only day games we currently play are generally on Sunday, but they can be in the evening as well. And at our current location, some years we've done Sunday games at 1:30, sometimes we've done them at 6:30. And most of that was based on business reasons, but if we found that there were conflicting uses between the expo and the ballpark, we would likely move the games to Sunday evening to make sure that that would work. As far as additional parking, on the site, there is room to add additional parking. I think our desire is not to do this in the smartest way possible, but there is flexibility to add additional parking. As far as handicap parking, I don't know the specific requirements. We're obviously going to comply with them. One of the things that excites us about this location at our current facility in Prince William, the parking is all a good distance away from the stadium, and it does create a significant issue for fans of ours who do have disabilities. The stadium design does provide for parking that is very close to the stadium, and obviously we will prioritize that parking to make it as easy as possible for those fans. Anything else?
Thank you.
Okay. If you have any other questions, we're happy to address them. But again, the parking concern is our concern as well, and we're going to do everything to make sure that that works well.
Is that to your satisfaction?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, any other comments? Okay, at this time, we'll accept any motions.
I move to approve SUP 2018-03, the special use permit for Potomac Baseball.
Okay.
Second.
Any seconds? Mr. Toole, thank you. Any quick comments?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Although there are many good things about this project, and I believe I've heard nothing but good things about the Silvers and their efforts to bring baseball to Fredericksburg. And I see you're ably represented by my old buddy there, Mr. Sharp. But despite all that, I will be voting against this for several reasons, in addition to what I talked about earlier about the financial commitment of the city. But that's not directly tied to a special use permit. But I have several concerns directly related to this application. One is I think that the interchange is absolutely essential to having a successful project there. And I realize that if you wait forever on the government to approve an interchange, you may not live long enough to see that. But I think it is absolutely essential. That's one problem. I'm totally opposed to another 175-foot sign along the interstate. I think the one that's there now is very distracting and is not a good way to represent the city. If somehow the signage could be combined and have only a single sign, I think that would be very helpful. I think that the lighting and noise impacts are inappropriate for 500 apartments being built directly across the street. I don't think someone who lives in an apartment should deserve any less protection from these kinds of impacts on them than anyone else. I think that the parking arrangement may very well work well, and I believe in shared parking, and you don't want to build any more parking than you need to. But I think there needs to be some better plan in place. And last but not least, I'm opposed to master plan approvals by the staff. I think that sort of second stage, there's nothing wrong with having a master plan stage later, but I think it should come back to the Planning Commission. And I think that it's a way to basically subvert the role of the Planning Commission. So I'll be voting against it.
Okay. If there are any other comments? If there are not at this point, go ahead and vote. Okay, thank you. At this time, I believe Mr. Horning can come back and end my reign of terror.
He's on parole now, right?
Thank you very much, Mr. Slominski. Next item of business is public hearing C, Area 6 Small Area Plan, the proposed amendments to Chapter 10 Land Use Plan, Chapter 11 Planning Areas of the City's Comprehensive Plan. Is that you, Mr. Johnston, or are we going to Suzanne?
Ms. Finn will give us a overview of these amendments regarding Area 6.
But, I'm sorry, before you go into that, if you wouldn't mind, do we have a deadline on this, and what is that? I know you were probably going to have that, but I'd like to know before we start discussing this.
So it was recommended by the City Council on August 14th, and you have 90 days
Okay.
to have your public hearing and
Okay.
recommendation back to them.
Thanks.
So it'll be November 14th, which I think is tight for your first meeting in November, but as a last.
Okay,
last
thank
vote.
you.
So just to refresh everyone's memory about where we ended up with the comprehensive plan amendments for Area 6. The amendments are for Part 3 of the comprehensive plan, which is the land use section, and includes changes to both Chapter 10, the introduction, and Chapter 11, which is the adoption of the small area plan for Area 6. In Chapter 10 includes an update to the transect matrix already adopted under the Area 3 small area plan, but adds the two transects highlighted, T4M and T5M, which will then be applied for the small area plan for Area 6. Just want to walk you through where we ended up applying these transects in Area 6. We have the full spectrum, really, with T1 are natural areas, T3E are low-level residential, T3 are more moderate level residential, T4 which contains some higher density residential and commercial opportunities. T4M, which is our lower level of our Maker District. T5M, which is our more intense area for the Maker District. T5C, which is our highway commercial, and a civic transect as well for the high school. So the area plan focuses on several key elements, and a large part of this is the protection of the existing neighborhoods. We recognize that any new development considered in Area 6 needs to defer to the protection of these neighborhoods as a first and foremost consideration. It also calls for the promotion of conservation districts or pattern books to further recognize the strength of these existing neighborhoods. Another key element is the Maker District. This whole concept is really built around incentivizing the preservation of the character of the existing structures of these corridors. It includes calling for a transfer of development right program to protect these assets as well as promote new development, recognizing that these structures are already designed to support the modern maker economy, so we're trying to help that flourish there. Another key component of the Maker District is built around the variations in form. So it identifies nodes or areas where the public realm was really shaped by the urban fabric, corridors where there are variations in setback, but these structures and these types of building forms are necessary to support more production-based uses. And so to tie these corridors and nodes together, we've called for third spaces, public greens, courtyards, and sidewalks that kind of unite the district. The area plan talks quite a bit about guiding redevelopment. It's really about the evolution of three key corridors. And so an example of this is highlighted in the area plan. So for the parking lots currently surrounding or nearby 2300 Fall Hill Avenue, we call for a redevelopment scenario that preserves the character defining features. It offers opportunities for commercial growth along the corridors and residential buildings in really all forms. And this includes an inclusion of single-family homes, which really mirrors the existing pattern we already see and therefore protecting the neighborhoods. The plan also identifies environmental and historic resources found throughout the area. And in the plan, we also talk about considerations for access and mobility, including two-way street conversions, crossing enhancements, view corridors, trail mapping, and all of these are promoting and continuing the recommendations of the VDOT STARS program. So our recommendation is for approval of these amendments, which would refer them back to the City Council for public hearing and adoption within 90 days. Happy to take any questions.
Any questions from members of the commission at this time? Sorry, Jim.
I got a question.
Hit you real quick.
Sorry.
Yes. Mr. Rodriguez.
Yes. Okay. So, how did you all, or how was it assessed in terms of like where the, I guess the T3 and T4 start and begin? I'm just curious as to where you decided to.
So I'll go back to that. Oops.
Yes, please.
Back to
Trying to
that
find
map
that
for
map.
you. Yeah, so the T3 really is going to be primarily residential.
Right.
And so that's pretty much everything that's there, whereas the T4 is where we start to see opportunities for commercial development. So as an example, on Fall Hill Avenue, sorry, the street isn't labeled, but near the bottom of the map there's that T4 that kind of juts into the T3 area. So that includes the Economy Food Mart, which is a commercial building. So we wanted to include that kind of low level of commercial development in the T4. But it also includes Mill Park Terrace at this moment. No, we've changed that. Right, so never mind. But it includes some of the lower level commercial on the other side of Route 1, which is like, some small scale office buildings and things like that.
Union Bank over there.
Union Bank. What else have we got in there?
Yeah, but look at the next block there.
Over here
By the residential.
is our T4.
You know where the orthopedic center is. Why is half of that residential?
I'm not sure which one.
It's not.
That whole block.
These buildings are all owner occupied single family homes. So
Orthopedics to the south.
Isn't that in,
that down here.
that's Union Bank right there. Right next to it is the orthopedic clinic.
Right. That whole block.
Now that's 2 blocks.
No, it's one block.
Maybe the building outlines will help us.
That's 1 block?
Yep.
Yeah.
Big block.
Block from my house.
Jeff's house is here.
You mean their residential, their houses on the same block as Union Bank?
The backside.
Next block down.
The backside, opposite the street.
This
But it's a parking lot and
I thought all the residential was across the street from those 2 buildings. Anyway, go ahead, I'm sorry.
But that's how we've differentiated the T3 and the T4.
All right. Can I see the T4 added in again? I'm sorry. Okay. All right. And then all right, maybe I got confused. So I guess when you build it out with the polka dot thing.
The polka dots. We'll keep going.
Okay, that part. All right. All right. So I guess, yeah, so that's, I guess my question is, okay, so how did we decide, where we went from T3 to T4 polka dot? I guess coming from the residential side, I wish these had street names on them.
Right.
I
Sorry
was
about
trying
that.
to,
So the
Fall Hill.
the T4M T3 boundaries is right here, which is Hunter Street.
Right.
And so, here we see single-family residences, and here is where it transitions to being the commercial buildings that have supported, the former medical campus.
right, okay. All right. Okay, thank you.
So I have a question. This talks about, under access and mobility, the one-way pairs.
Mhm.
Did I see somewhere that there was a dispute over whether or not the city was going to continue with that concept, or has that been, this seems to kind of memorialize that. Is that a direction that the city is elected to go in, or is that part of this discussion?
That's what this document is proposing, that shift.
And has there been any other discussion? I could have sworn I heard something in a meeting somewhere. There was some folks questioning whether or not that should be done, and I'm not advocating one way or another. I just thought that hadn't been decided.
There's been questions in the Public Works Department about the technical workability of it. Will left turn lanes take out on-street parking? Will change in the direction somehow necessitate the reinstitution of lights at some place along Fall Hill? So that is a technical issue that is being resolved with a second follow-up study to this effort that is starting momentarily, and we hope to have that recommendation back in the next few weeks.
Okay, yeah, I'd kind of like to see that, because this sort of says it's no longer warranted, and they're, and I don't know that I have an opinion either way, but there are businesses and folks that live out there, and judging by our crowd, doesn't seem like either people don't know about this potential discussion, or maybe they're okay with it during our work sessions, or when we did have the small area plan discussion. But that one caught my eye, because I didn't know if that was something that through this we were.
It has been discussed multiple times at the Fall Hill Neighborhood Association, and it seems to me the majority of those folks that attend that meeting are in favor of it. I think there's a real, from my perspective, I think there's a real benefit from a traffic calming standpoint to slow traffic down, which has been a significant concern of the Fall Hill neighborhood folks, particularly on Washington Street. So I think that will serve that purpose of traffic calming and create what's a street pattern that's more appropriate in a residential area. And I think that the technical operational concerns, that was the word I was trying to search for earlier, operational concerns are reasonable questions, and we answer that.
This also references the STARS study, and I know we've seen it. You distributed it to us. What's the potential for funding the STARS? Is that something that is through a future VDOT allocation or a city project? Because most of those be pretty difficult to get someone to do incrementally with an individual project. Where's that thinking stand?
These are understood to be public projects. The Fall Hill Route 1 intersection proposed changes, which simplistically is adding multiple turn lanes in multiple directions.
It's very much needed.
I'm sorry?
It's very much needed.
Yes. Is being submitted by the city currently, right now, for smart scale funding. If it were approved, that would still be, 5-7 years out before it would be finished, but nevertheless, that funding proposal is going forward in this process. And then in subsequent years, we would come back and, assuming we're successful with Fall Hill and Route 1, then we would come back and address the Princess Anne Route 1 intersection. And hopefully there would be more clarification in the next few years as to the replacement for the Route 1 bridge, which obviously that intersection improvement would have some impact, be mutually impact on each other. And to anticipate your question, there is no funding process that's been established for the replacement of the Route 1 bridge, other than a general acknowledgement that it is something that needs to be done. Something like 85% of that bridge is actually in Stafford County, because the city's line is at the south side of the riverbank, so it relies a great deal on Stafford County taking the lead on that.
Okay, thank you. Those are my questions. Anyone else?
Yeah.
Jim?
I have a whole bunch of questions, but I was actually hoping that we might not vote on this tonight and that we might have a work session that would include a tour of this planning area. And the reason I would say that is because this plan is very specific in terms of designating areas for certain land uses, for the transfer of development rights between the sending and the receiving. And if and when we adopt ordinances implementing this, and we come to be having rezoning applications, the first thing applicants are going to point to is, see, right here in your comp plan, you're calling for this right here. And I think it's incumbent on us to take a very close look at these transects. You know, the whole concept of these transects, I think is very good, and it's very interesting, but this is a complicated area. There's a lot going on. There are a lot of little different neighborhoods, the different kinds of uses. It's very different on one side of Route 1 and the other. And I just think before we vote on it, that we ought to collectively look at these maps on what they're contemplating and where. In particular, having to do with residential density. As you know, I'm very skeptical about a lot more of apartments in the city. And this clearly calls for a lot more, particularly in this neighborhood. And I think we just need to look at that very closely. I think probably in some places it's good. This also doesn't, I don't think, have enough language in here that truly protects our neighborhoods. I know she was saying first thing that that's important, but for example, if you have this TDR and you take 32 units that could be somewhere at the Coca-Cola building, I don't know how many are allowed by right, but let's say there are 32 there, and they're going to leave that building as it is, but move those 32 units over to Route 1 somewhere, it seems to me that we ought to look at that and think about that to make sure that we think that is potentially a good thing, and if it is by special use permit, it seems to me that we may be able to protect it, but it would be nice in this plan to have some guidelines, if it were done by special use permit, what sort of things we'd be looking for in terms of protecting these neighborhoods. And I think it just takes a little closer look. I also still have a lot of concerns about the TDR business. Again, I think it's a good idea somewhere in the city to have this maker district, but one of the key purposes of the transfer of development rights is preservation of these buildings, which is, again, that's a good thing, but at what price? And are we really, and what chances do we think there are of it really being successful? For example, one of the questions I had about the TDR, okay, so you have these sending areas and the receiving areas. Okay, let's take Carl's Ice Cream, for example. I don't know how many units, if they tore down that building, they could build, what, 8 units, 6 units? I don't know. It's not a very big site, but let's just say 4 units. Okay, so you put the TDR there, that would be a site where they could send their density elsewhere, okay? How is that going to actually work so that if Carl's decides that they want to enter into this agreement with the city, okay, they sign a contract with the city saying we're going to keep our building, we're not going to mess with it at all, and our 4 units that we would have the right to build here, we're willing to sell those to somebody else. When that agreement is made with the city, would the receiving property be part of the agreement?
Absolutely, because
Okay.
the owners of Carl's is, I would assume, not going to just give their resources away, that there would be an agreement that between those two parties and the city would be in a sense approving the agreement, because part of the agreement also would be in a stipulation by the owners of Carl's that they would preserve, protect in an appropriate manner the Carl's building, because that's the key
Okay.
reason.
Can I ask you a question? The city isn't gonna purchase rights. Is that,
No.
this is a private transaction.
right.
We're in a regulatory role.
Right.
We ensure that as part of the sale, like Chuck said, you do a preservation plan. That's kind of the city's role.
Well, that's my concern is about the regulatory role. Okay, so you have a willing seller and a willing buyer, and these 4 units are going to go over there. Okay, and so the site is fixed. Okay, what say-so does the city have in that transaction in terms of how the receiving property is going to develop that site?
Yeah, I'm intrigued by your idea of a field trip. I think it's great. And what we're trying to do is set the stage for form-based protections. And what you commonly think about when you hear density is big, tall buildings and this kind of stuff. But we're talking in 4 and 6 unit increments. And the way the plan is set up now, and I'm very confident in that, but we need to go out and talk about this, is that we're going to have transitional areas, controlled heights, controlled widths on these buildings. We have the Princess Anne corridor regulations that are good. We need to melt them into a single regulatory process because currently it's very onerous to go through 2 and 3 processes. But we have these protections currently in place that I think really will help this all fit into the neighborhood. And I think it's a great idea for us to go out and talk about that. And that's why we're so confident that this works, because there will be a form in place that you can't break out of.
Well, I don't know. I don't mean to monopolize this, but I mean, that sounds good. But I'm not at all sure that a form-based code is the panacea for all of our problems.
No, it's not. But we're going to have one coming to you all. Sorry, I should speak
No.
out of school. You're going to be reviewing the Area 3 form-based code coming up. That is at a certain scale. That's redevelopment of shopping centers, very focused on rebuilding streets, redesigning blocks, building the basic fabric into the city. And then you got building types at the end, and they're pretty general, but we have a transitional building type that's designed to do this. A general building can be so big, but adjacent to neighborhoods, it's a maximum of 50-foot wide, and it can only be, if it's residential, 35-foot tall, because that's what R4 standard is, or if it's commercial, 2 stories tall. So that's the stuff. In this district, it will be a more finely grained form-based code. We will be focusing more on those buildings and their arrangement, and not so much on the I mean, certainly you'll be required to do streets and blocks, but that's not the big issue here.
So you're talking about different form-based requirements in the code for this area as opposed to the rest of the city?
Oh, yeah, the Maker District will be its own form-based code, and the language in our plan is set up, and if you read it in there, it's all about transitioning into the existing land uses. And Mr. Rodriguez's question was good. Why did we pick transects? Why did we locate them there, and why do we write the language in each transect? They're a measure of intensity. And instead of saying that's going to be a house or a gasoline shop or something, we say this is the level of intensity that it's going to be in terms of its transition from the corridor to.
But see, by the time you get that, and you have a form-based code at administrative approvals, you won't need much of a planning commission, will you?
Absolutely, we will. You all need to set this stuff up. And
No, but once it's set up, there wouldn't be much coming to us, right?
There will
Isn't that-
always be stuff coming to you. There will be special, go ahead, Chuck. There's
Well,
special uses and other stuff.
I sense the role of the planning commission is to establish policy and ordinances to regulate what's going forward.
But one of the main ways of achieving that is through the special use permit process.
And on higher densities, when those issues are relatively more intense, that does make some sense. But our sense is that the planning commission has the ability, we believe, to fully understand the policies and the ordinances that would set up this process, and that administratively it can go forward. I don't think that, I would hope the planning commission would fully understand the regulatory and the policies aspects of how projects go forward.
Well, I'm skeptical about that, but one other thing I wanted to just ask a clarification on. Can you put the transects back up there with the 2 residential transects, the T3 and the T3 edge? Okay. Can you explain to me, it says here in your memo that there is, that the, where is it? Yes. This is on page 186, when you're talking about the T3 transect. It says, current densities in these neighborhoods range from 8 to 18 units per acre. And so that is the, I don't know what you call that color, it's the the darker shade of the gray or whatever. What do you call that color?
It's a lavender.
Lavender, okay, we'll call it lavender. Well, I don't understand why in this plan we would want a higher density than we have across the street there, across Fall Hill, in the T3E transect.
This
Don't we
isn't-
already, though?
This isn't calling
the
for
density that
new,
exists.
new densities. This isn't prescriptive, this is descriptive. 8 to 18 units an acre already exists in the T3.
But there are virtually no 8 to 18 unit structures in that area.
Yes, there are.
Not many.
Oh, yeah, if you look at, took the sum total of the acreage of those blocks and the number of units in the blocks, that's the density of the.
It's not in one unit, it's the density per acre.
It's the density per acre.
Well, that's
per
because
block.
they're big blocks, they're long blocks.
And then there's that many more, small, single-family lots on those blocks. That's the density of, the density of units per acre of that block is in that range.
But if the comp plan is calling for that higher density, what zoning category would that translate to?
We're not advocating for a change in the zoning in the residential district.
No, but I mean, what would it be? I mean, if you had a vacant
Your
area.
neighborhoods should be zoned R16, but they're not, they're zoned R4. Isn't that interesting? And
Why do you think they should be?
what's that?
Why do you think they should be?
I don't think they should be, nobody's proposing that.
Well, that's my point here, is it seems to me that this whole area, in terms of the transects and zoning, should be the same.
But
Then
what's
you're
on,
right, then you think it should be R16.
No, I think it ought to be R4, and
but that
that,
doesn't reflect the existing pattern of development. You have all the areas non-conforming uses in terms of lot size, setbacks, structure arrangement. What we're thinking is that the T3 would be more appropriate for R8, that would match, not completely, there would still be a lot of nonconformity, but it's the closest zoning district that we would have that would make sense.
but it seems to me if you had that higher density in the comp plan, and as you say, currently in our zoning, what's to stop somebody, in some cases, from tearing down a house and building two?
Because they wouldn't be allowed, the R8 wouldn't, those lots today are denser than R8.
No, you can't.
Those lots today,
Well,
you already have a density greater than R8 there, so,
We're just describing the facts on the ground, Mr. Bates.
so they can't tear something down and divide a small lot in half in R8 and create a townhouse, whatever, because that's just not
I
allowed.
think this is an important point. This is about Bunker Hill Street. There was 2 lots underneath the house, and that is an R4. This is a problem. That house was torn down, and 2 houses were put in its place.
right.
And the neighbors came to us and said, let them do a duplex. Give us more room on either side of our house. And we said, sorry, the R4 zoning district doesn't permit that type of use. Though it's prevalent in that neighborhood. Those neighborhoods have all kinds of alternative housing built into them, but it's illegal because it's R4. So we couldn't respond to the neighbors. They had to build 2 separate single-family homes and produce setbacks, and that was a shame. So that would be a nice change to make it match, so that you could have done that duplex.
So how would this, the comp plan transect here that you're recommending, what impact would that have on that situation? None.
Unless we went to a rezoning to R8 for the neighborhoods to allow that additional use, and that would be up to you guys. We don't want to change anything in the neighborhoods, that's not the this plan. What we want to do, the language in there states that if your group comes in and you all feel strongly about the character of your neighborhood, you can do 1 of 3 things. You can get together and from the ground up, it has to come from you all. You can decide you want to do a pattern book, which is a very low level, a way to help redevelopment in your neighborhood. You go through and you survey the neighborhood and see what the architectural features are, and you have a book that then you give to an infill developer to guide their development of an infill house, but it's not regulatory. Or you guys can say, hey, we care so much about our neighborhood's character, we want to do a conservation district. That could have regulatory effect on your neighborhood. Well, that's why it has to come from you guys. You You gotta put the rules on yourself.
You,
for
the property
the
owner.
property owner. That's right. Neighborhood association, the neighborhood groups, probably, you probably want 75% of your, of the landowners that it will affect to do this. It could affect demolition. It'll be like a historic district light. We could go all in on a historic district and have this, an ARB developed that governs the use of your lot.
Well, I don't want to, you know,
That's the
bore
protection,
bore
that's the
everybody
change that
tonight.
We're asking for in the neighborhood zone. That's it.
But-
Just initiating that stuff.
But I'd like to continue this discussion because the situation you were describing on Bunker Hill was a very unfortunate one, and the neighbors were upset about that, and I don't blame them. And I'd like for us to think about that and try to figure out what's the best way to address that type of situation, whether it's one lot or two lots.
And we think the zoning there ought to match what's on the ground. And that would mean R8 zoning.
No.
That would mean R8 zoning.
It doesn't enable any new lot, we've done the check on that, it doesn't enable any, it enables one new lot by the canal on Green Street, it's probably undevelopable anyway. But otherwise, the pattern doesn't change, there's no new additional development that can occur, but it wouldn't allow you to do a duplex in a situation like that. It would bring your house, those folks' house, sorry, I know you live there, I keep saying yours, of those people's houses to be even more in conformance with their setback rules and things like that. So we think it's a good idea, but
anyway,
it's
my
not the intent of
Anyway, my point of all that is that I think there are some additional things that we can do here that will strengthen neighborhood protections. And so I would suggest that we have a work session and that it include a neighborhood tour during the day when everybody can see things and go through some of these things.
Mr. Pates, I would entertain that motion after we have the public hearing. I'd also like to entertain keeping the public hearing open as part of that, so that if there's further comment as we continue, but this is scheduled for a public hearing tonight, so we want to do that. Are there any other comments, questions for staff before we proceed with the public hearing? Okay, hearing none. If there's anyone from the public who would like to speak on this matter, please do so. If you mind stating your name and address.
Mr. Chairman, Planning Commission, staff, my name is Ed Galen, 1707 Princess Anne Street. I am very interested in this because it does affect a lot of the properties that we have acquired through the years. In fact, when we started our redevelopment program, the color of my hair was more like yours, Mr. Chairman, a long time ago. I support this moving forward because I think that what it actually does is, with this transfer of development rights, is allows us to save some of the buildings that the city would like to save. And for example, if you're familiar, 4 years ago we rezoned the Silk Mill block, and our development plan was to knock down the hotel in front of Princess Anne Street and build a new building on the face of Princess Anne Street. What this change does, it implements a vehicle with the transfer development rights for us to change our plans and keep that building and possibly just transfer those rights to another property. So we see this as a tool. Same thing with the sign company next door. These are buildings that they have character, that can be saved, but they've met their life expectancy. It's going to take a lot of money to redevelop them. So with this TDR program, that is a way that some of these buildings can be salvaged and redeveloped in a way that I think the city's goal is to keep the character of downtown the way it was. So we've been waiting patiently to change our development plans to see how this turns out. Like I said, this has been over a year and a half. I'm thankful the city has taken the initiative to have Street Sense do this study and see how this can actually function and work. And I'm here to tell you that it would definitely impact the properties that we have. And I think it is the vision of the cities, and we'd like to participate in that. We're actually looking at some of those transfer development rights, if we didn't use some of them, to actually donate them to nonprofit organizations that can actually take that and actually use those funds to help to bring some really neat things into the city, into that neighborhood. So I think this is a vehicle and moving in this direction. And I would encourage you to move it forward and approve it. And staff's done a great job working on this. It is time consuming, but I welcome you all to come out and look at our buildings. And I would just encourage us to move forward with this and before I get any more gray hair, okay? I appreciate taking the time to speak to you and be glad to have any of us come to our buildings whenever you have the chance to. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wyland. Anybody else like to speak? All right, seeing none, I would recommend that we keep the public hearing open so that we can have further comment in future meetings. Do we have any other discussion? I do like Mr. Pate's suggestion that we do a field trip. I don't know what staff's position is on that.
I think the concept is great. We have a challenge of open meeting requirements. I believe we will have to follow the pattern we did when we were doing the fence amendments, meaning that we would do field trips with you two at a time and then have a work session for the whole group. I think that was the recommendation from the city attorney's office in that circumstance, that if we have 3 or more of you all together in a field trip, then it becomes a meeting and we have to say where the meeting's occurring, et cetera. And also, you all have complex schedules, and it might be easier to arrange this 2 at a time in terms of but I think we're happy to do that, realizing that's multiple trips on our part, but we're glad to do that. So procedurally, I think we would want to arrange those things. Just looking at the calendar, we have the work session scheduled on the 10th as part of the charrette process for the downtown plan. We did not have any items for public hearing that evening. I would throw out the idea that we shift that work session to 7:30 because I think it helps everyone's participation. I know it's tough for some of you all to get here at 6:30 in the evening. So I'm suggesting that we on the 10th have a 7:30 work session. It would be located at the former museum, former bank across from Hyperion, where the September 11th public information kickoff meeting is. Your second meeting in October is on the 24th. We could do the work session on the 24th. You all may be aware that last night Council did agree to initiate the amendments regarding the form-based code for Area 3. If you all feel that you can handle 2 concepts in the same evening, we could have a work session on the 24th to address both those topics. If you felt like you could handle both those topics in one evening, not saying that you can't, but it does get a little complex and you'd have to keep that separate. Then there is the meeting on November 14th. Right, November 14th would be your next regular meeting. Again, the deadline is for action. I'm sure the city attorney could work out a way where we went back to council and council could grant you an extension or something. I'm certain that's been done before in some manner, shape, or form. So we can certainly not, go whatever procedure is necessary if it is required to go beyond the 14th. But we have the deadline for your November 14th meeting is October 1st. We haven't received any items for public hearing at that point, but that deadline is next week, so I don't know that there may or may not be items for public hearing that evening. So do you feel as though you could handle both the Area 3 form-based code amendments on the 24th as well as a work session on Area 6, or do you want to split them up?
My inclination is to keep them separate.
Me too.
I mean, I'm not one to, want to meet more often than we have to, but I think we need time to focus
Okay.
and not be
So on the
rushed.
24th, let's do the work session on Area 6,
Yeah.
and we'll bring the form-based code elements to you on November 14th for that, advertise that public hearing. It wouldn't surprise me for you all to say, well, we're not quite comfortable voting on the 14th, and that might, go to a second meeting as well, which I understand. I didn't mean that to be negative, but, So we will arrange field trips with everyone prior to a meeting on the 24th. And if you have any additional questions or information, please communicate that to Susanna or Mike. One other observation I will make, and will require some thinking on our part. Mr. Pace asked some very good detailed questions that really are only going to be answered when you have an ordinance before you. We have not written the TDR ordinance. The city attorney has not gotten involved in that at this point. She knows it's coming. She anticipates it. But you ask very good workability questions that cannot be really answered until we actually have an ordinance. And the pattern has been to sort of say, well, let's see if we agree with the concept, the policy, understanding that when there's an ordinance, we're going to get into, well, how? Who's going to sign that agreement? I can't answer that, Mr. Pates, until we actually have an ordinance. Now, we can share with you an outline of some of the elements of the ordinance. We can certainly do that. I would not want the commission to though feel bound by that outline, because that's the next topic for a discussion. The concept of allowing transfer of development rights, I would hope the commission could understand and agree to that concept, knowing that it can only be implemented, it only can take effect once an ordinance is in place. And if an ordinance never gets adopted, then the policy remains unfulfilled. And if council, the commission, and ultimately the council, if it takes a while for us to figure out how to make it work, then so be it. And the policy, simply having a policy, does not require you to pass the ordinance. It certainly says that that's an appropriate thing to do, but it's not a stipulation. So as we go forward, let's talk about that more and get a better sense of what an expectation would mean. I would hate for us to share with you an outline that says whatever it may say, and for us to go down the rabbit hole of, well, I don't agree with that particular provision in that outline. Sorry, Mr. Rodriguez. I'm talking
You must have said something.
I'm sorry, I'm talking too much here. That to allow us to go down the rabbit hole of saying, well, I have a problem with something that's on that outline, when that really is not being proposed at this point in time. It's simply the concept. So let's try to keep an open mind and see if we can figure out a way to deal with that.
Yeah.
Okay, so I don't believe we need a motion. Do we need a motion to continue this? I mean, it's basically leaving it open.
No,
So.
by consensus, you as chair can simply say we're going to leave the
So
public hearing open and work and renew the public hearing on October 24th.
Do I have agreement on the right? Do I have agreement on the right side of the horseshoe, or my right side with that?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, so then we will be deferring that, I guess, or continuing it to the, say,
I think we might be able to set at least one time, maybe two, for these tours.
Absolutely.
I hate to see us go separately. I mean, I don't think there's any reason we couldn't all go together and advertise it as a meeting, but if you really don't want to do that, because it's so nice to hear other people's comments when you're looking at something like that.
The only other way I think you could do it would be to schedule 4 stops and give 15-minute windows at each stop. I don't know if that's possible or not, but, you know.
If the public wanted to attend, they could ride along.
Well, I'll give you a little history. I mean, when Central Park, Jervis simply got a city bus, a Fred bus. They advertised it. There were a few people who lived around there, they got on the bus with us, so we did it that way.
Well, we'll certainly work with the city attorney's office.
I like that.
She'll be comfortable with and get back to you all on that.
Thank you, Chuck.
But you want to try to set any times tonight?
It's good.
I think we ought to check with the city attorney first to see if we can do it as one group meeting and then do that.
I'll send out, if we can do this jointly, I'll just send out a group notice and we'll do what's that called? A doodle that you
A
can
doodle
respond
poll.
to.
All right. Even I know how to do that.
Which We'll do a doodle,
Not very
which
technical.
meetings, it's an app for picking what time is the most commonly acceptable meeting time. Well, you know, if it's appropriate, we'll shoot for the week of October 15th. Does anyone have a conflict that week
It's,
that you know of at this point?
it's going to be hard for me. I was hoping that we might, since this is during the day, that we could either do it on a Wednesday or a Friday when I'm in town. Otherwise, it's going to be hard for me.
So the 17th is good for you?
I could, yes.
Is that an issue for everyone? Is that good for everyone?
What
All
day
right,
of the week?
tentatively, we'll try to shoot for Wednesday the 17th. I mean, I know your preference for Wednesdays, Mr. Pate, so we will.
Or
try to
Friday
shoot
the
for that.
12th would be even better. But anyway,
Unfortunately, that's our charrette week, and I think the
Ah.
12th, that's going to be the big
You're
public
gonna be all
information
shredded
meeting at the
out.
end. Yeah, we'll be
The,
shredded.
The 12th is
I
also
can just go to a
the,
planning commission thing every day.
the 12th is also PAC 802's Weeblos Camping, first night of camping.
All right,
At,
that's very important.
It's a two-night deal, so I'm,
The good old
I don't know
days,
that I'd be able to attend that.
I understand.
Very excited about that.
Important priority.
Okay, moving on, next, general public comment. Is there anyone from the public who wishes to speak to the commission tonight? Other business, planning commissioner comments.
I'm commented out.
I was going to tell you were, but glad you said that. Planning director comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll try to be brief, although that's a real challenge for me. Just to give a recount of what happened last night at City Council, you're going to step out for a second? No. Okay. Regarding an item that the chairman is somewhat conflicted on, the 7-Eleven Valvoline special use permit item was pulled from the council agenda at the request of the applicant. There was a 30-day deferral on that. The applicant is still addressing the issue of the driveway crossing the landscape buffer and trying to address council concerns about that. The 64 townhouse unit project called Valley Run off of Route 1 near Dunning Mill was approved by council last night. Mr. Withers had issues with it, primarily, I'm oversimplifying here, but primarily because we don't have form-based code standards in place to address that kind of development. He abstained. He felt he couldn't vote in favor of it, but he did believe that the applicant would do as best job as they could. So nevertheless, that did get a 6-0-1 vote from council. As I just mentioned, the form-based code in Article 5 amendments associated with Area 3 were agreed to by council to initiate. There was a work session that Mr. Beavers attended where we had a lengthy discussion of it. I was very pleased to see that I could tell the council members actually read everything, and they were asking some very detailed and very good questions, and I was very pleased to see that. Mr. Beavers, you had any comments you wanted to make about that?
No, what you just said. I mean, Mr. Withers and Matt Kelly, I mean, they had some very, very deep questions about what we wanted to do and, you know, Route 3 and, you know, the new roads that would come up to it and all that and all the things that we would want to make that a safer, more attractive, more livable place.
We'll focus on advertising that for November 14th and try to move that along. I just want to remind everyone regarding the charrette, that is the week of October 8th. On Monday the 8th in the evening at 7 o'clock, there will be a general public information meeting and all these events are occurring where the September 11th public information meeting occurred. I'm repeating that endlessly just so there's no confusion. It's all going to be at the corner of William and Princess Anne. So at 7 o'clock that evening, there will be a general public information meeting. Everyone can come. Please do that. At 6 o'clock that same evening, the ARB is having their focused work session, because that just happens to be the night that they meet. On the next day, on Tuesday, the 9th, at 5:30, council will be having its work session there at the Charette locale to have a discussion then, and focused on council issues. Then on Wednesday, the 10th, at 7:30, because I think that works for everyone best, it's the commission's turn to sort of interact in the charrette program. There are going to be other events and activities that you can drop in on or have individual discussions with the charrette team that we will tell you about. We're actually going to the Street Sense offices tomorrow to finalize that schedule, so we'll certainly be sharing that with you.
And what time is that going to be?
Which,
The charrette for us,
the 7:30
7:30,
on Wednesday, the 10th.
okay.
Okay, which would be the time and date of your regular meeting, except it's going to be there at 1001 Princess Anne.
I have a note from 2 weeks ago, it says October 10th, pre-meeting 6:30 PM, so,
That's when I thought we might be having public hearing items in the evening, and since we're not having public hearing
Okay.
items in the evening, and since I know some of you have a real challenge getting here at 6:30, I said, let's just shift the whole thing from the
Okay.
work session back to 7:30, and we will not have a 6:30 work session, so we'll just shift
Good.
everything to
Thank
7:30.
you.
one other minor question, don't you guys have that Monday off? Isn't that Columbus Day?
Columbus Day has become an optional holiday for city employees.
Oh.
and
You're not exercising your option
We're
then, eh?
not exercising that option. We can elect to take that day at any day we choose now, so.
I see.
There you go. There you go.
Turn the mic on and say.
There you go. The other date I want to draw your attention to regarding the charrette is then that Friday, the 12th, at 7 o'clock will be the concluding session, where there will be the ta-da, this is where we are on all this. Yeah, right. We'll have the closing ceremonies. And mayhem will generally break out. There was, you may recall on Saturday, there was the Art Attack Art Festival on Caroline Street. Mike and I had a table down there. We passed out the placemat information for people to sort of fill out. We passed out a survey. There is a survey online. Feel free, please, take the survey, take a look at it. It's a little bit more detailed than other kind of questions have been asked. And we got a lot of folks saying, well, what's the plan? And we said, well, that's why we're getting your comments. We want to know what are your concerns. But we did lay out the very topical areas that I think we've been discussing. You know, what are we going to do along the river? What are we going to do in terms of preservation issues, in terms of density issues, in terms of the one-way street network within downtown? What else? Affordable housing issues, mixed-use development issues. Appropriate development levels around the train station, the concept of a South Side Maker District on the near end of Lafayette. All those were sort of thrown out there, and see if folks had anything else they wanted to talk about. So that went well. We're going to do this again at the Farmers Market a week from Saturday, right? The 6th. So Susanna and Mike and I, in some tag team format, will be involved with that.
Will you have any vegetables to sell?
It's the Harvest Festival, right? So maybe
Okay, good.
You see, you got people shopping and pumpkins at Harvest, and then the two of y'all sitting there. I'm not talking about you, but I'm thinking of the Art Attack. You know, you got all this great art, and then you two guys at a table mid-street. Okay.
Have you seen those posters? They are art.
Okay. All right. I was just curious.
And when we had people
Very
fill out the
effective marketing
placemat,
tool.
Some folk got quite artistic.
Yeah.
Some people in particular. And just the other piece of information, you all recommended action on the data center text amendment, and that's going to council on Tuesday the 9th. And we believe that will probably go through, but that text amendment is moving along. I believe that's all I had, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Any other business tonight? If not, we are adjourned. Have a good night.